Running a couple minutes late today. Had some technical issues, but today, 10:02 a.m. on Mondays, we cover a missional moment here at Redeemer East Side, and we've been looking at the practice of peace, an acronym that spells out five practices: P for pause, E for ask, E for eat, A for ask, C for commune, and E for examine. And today we were scheduled to go over the fourth practice of commune, to do this with others in community. But in light of everything that's happening in our country, in light of the protests, in light of I think the pain and the anger that our African American brothers and sisters in particular are feeling through everything that's happening around the death of George Floyd and so many others, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, I felt it was necessary for us to pause on covering these practices and actually to back up a little bit to talk about why we felt practices of peace was an apt way to talk about these things. So first, maybe the notion of practices. What is a practice? If you think about it, a practice, when do you practice? If you're a pianist or a dancer or an athlete, well, you practice in times when nobody else is watching, so that as you practice, you develop a certain muscle memory. And when it comes to the heat of the moment in public, you've practiced enough so that in the heat of that moment, you're able to respond in a way that you otherwise wouldn't have without that practice. That to me is a great analogy that for the notion of spiritual practices, where these are the things that we keep and do and practice in times when nobody else is looking, so that in the heat of the moment, again, whether it's that concert or the big game or whatever the context might be, but in the heat of the moment in public, the Christian can respond to those challenges in the manner and with the mission of Jesus. And so that's why we call them practices of peace. These practices won't lead you to do everything that you're meant to do, but they are meant to make you into a particular kind of a person that can respond with the mission of Jesus. If you're with us on Sunday, I talked a little bit about this notion of apprenticing your life to Christ. Be covered in the dust of your rabbi, that notion, and to practice these things means that we might be able to respond in very hard moments with the mission and the manner of Jesus. So that's why we look at practices. But the notion of peace, and I think this is really important in our moment today. We get the notion of peace, at least when we talk about the practices of peace. I have in mind passages like Jeremiah 29, where it says, "Seek the peace of the city to which I have sent you." It's the notion of shalom. Or John chapter 14, verse 27, Jesus saying, "My peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives, and so do not let your hearts be troubled." Now, what kind of peace is Jeremiah talking about? What kind of peace is Jesus talking about? This is not a peace that you close your eyes and escape from the world and find some sort of solace elsewhere to make the problems of the world disappear. Now, peace throughout the Bible and the peace that Jesus promises is a down payment of shalom. The biblical notion of shalom is beautiful and rich, and I think it needs to correct and inform how we use the word peace in our language today. But the concept of shalom is not the absence of conflict. It's at least that, but it's not merely that. The concept of shalom is not an emptying of things. The concept of shalom is a presence. It's the presence of justice. It's the presence of flourishing. It's the presence of belovedness. It's the presence of value. It's the presence of all these things. So the concept of peace in the Bible is a fullness and not an emptying. And so, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous quote, that peace, the kind of peace that we are shooting for, is not merely the absence of tension, it's the presence of justice. That is a deeply biblical idea. It's the presence of full flourishing, the shalom of God. And of course, we believe that there can be no deep there can be no deep shalom without a relationship with God. And that's at the heart of the gospel. But there can also be no presence of real shalom in the face of injustice and oppression. And so with everything going on in our world today, when we talk about peace, we're not merely talking about the absence of conflict, because that can very much be a form of control. You can control your way to peace. We're talking about a shalom which is the flourishing of all across all kinds of differences. And our African American brothers and sisters, it's clear this is not the shalom that they're experiencing in our country, that there's 400 years of racism, a nation built on the back of slavery, a nation that never dealt with these issues and has left it to be a wound that continues to fester at the cost of real lives. Today, it was heartbreaking to watch the video of George Floyd, which I actually only saw for the first time fully yesterday because I couldn't bring myself to watch it. But to be able to see that, a fellow image bearer, how can we not respond with compassion? How can we not respond with righteous indignation, you see? And so the practices of peace are meant to be the kinds of things that make us the kinds of people who can respond to that in the mission and in the manner of Jesus. Now, I know some people are asking a very valid question about, well, what about the rioting and the looting? Certainly that's not peace. And I don't think there's anybody out there who cares deeply about these issues of racial justice who is advocating for the lawlessness, as it were, in those moments. And so I think there's a commitment to that. There's an agreement that if we're committed to the practices of peace, the protests will have a certain manner and character of Jesus. But that said, I think it's critically important for us to ask the question, well, what is it that would make people respond in such a way? That there is a lack of shalom somewhere that runs so deep that is erupting in these moments where shalom is also absent in the rioting and the looting. And so peaceful protest is critically important, but let's not avoid the real moral urgent problem at hand, the issue of racial injustice. Let's not avoid that by deflecting attention so that it's primarily about the rioting. The rioting is important. It's an important moral issue. But the heart of it is an injustice, is the absence of shalom in our nation that we need to be paying attention to. And so the practices of peace are meant to form us to be the kinds of people who are like that. Now, very practically, and I know I'm going way along today, but very practically, you know, the last two practices that we looked at, the practice of eating with others and the practice of asking great questions. If you stop and think about it, wouldn't that create a kind of person who, rather than judging what's happening around these racial conversations, would instead seek to eat with someone different from them and ask questions out of compassion and curiosity, out of a desire to learn? That there is an impulse there. The practices make you the kind of person that say, I can't talk about these things or engage these things in the absence of deep, real relationship and friendships. And I can't engage in these things without the posture first of asking, of listening to our brothers and sisters of color, that we've not practiced those things. And practicing these things could maybe advance the conversation forward. But look, in the end, the practices that we keep can change our lives. It will draw us closer to God, send us deeper into the world, as we've been saying. But the practices alone aren't going to address these issues. These are systemic issues. These are larger issues. But practices can make us into the kind of person who can respond in public, in the heat of the moment, with the manner and the mission of Jesus. Jesus, who seeks the shalom, who gave us the shalom of the Spirit as a down payment of the shalom that he's after for all of his creation, for all of the material world, for all of our social world. It can make us into the kind of person that can respond in public in the heat of the moment in the manner and mission of Jesus. One small way that we can be covered in the dust of our rabbi along the lines of these critically important issues of racial hostility and division. So I hope it's something that you'll think about and pray through. And next week we will come back to talk about that practice of commune, the C. But I hope we'll continue in a posture of prayer. Our nation and our churches and our African American brothers and sisters in particular need that prayer. And even ask, what could I be doing? How can I contribute in a peaceful and constructive way to this cause? So thanks for joining today.